Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this panel session, which is kicking off the campaign for better silage. This is being supported by our sponsors, Volac, Yara, KRONE and LAMMA, all of which are represented on the panel today. More on this campaign will appear online at FG Insight and in our print titles, Farmer's Guardian and Dairy Farmer, and also on our various social media channels, so make sure you look out for that over the next 12 months. My name's Katie Jones. I'm the livestock editor at Farmer's Guardian and editor of Dairy Farmer. So why this campaign? Depending on where you are in the country, you may well have experienced a particularly challenging grass growing year in 2022. Many dairy farmers may have gone into this winter with lower silage stocks, and some will be hoping for a kind spring to facilitate early turnout and an early first cut. However, some farmers will have fared better than others, so we are here today to look at the techniques that may help produce the best results on your farm. So as I mentioned, we're joined by representatives of our sponsors, so I'll let them introduce themselves before we kick off the proceedings. So I'll start with Peter.
Hello, I'm Peter Smith. I'm a business manager for Volac. My sort of specialism, I suppose, is silage additives and silage making. I spent all my working life within agriculture, farming, milking cows, sold feed and whatever for many years, and then went into selling additives about 20 years ago. So I've had quite a in-depth experience with silage making for the last 20 odd years, and my role would be helping develop products and troubleshooting and things on farm.
Climate change is clearly having an impact on growing seasons, but to what extent do farmers need to consider changing practices to accommodate this? We'll start with Peter.
I think what we found over the last few years, where we've had very dry springs, wet springs, and all this sort of thing, I think where people have farming to a calendar, still going for silage on the 10th of May or whatever, very often the weather hasn't fallen in line, it's been wet, and then silages have been quite old and stale. And I think where people are moving towards this multi-cut type silage, where we're taking the silage cut off early when there is good weather, so you're banking an early crop, cleaning the grass off and getting a fresh cut coming back, that's probably one of the better ways to overcome this poor weather or climate change, I suppose. Yeah.
And before we go into looking at what farmers can be doing to adapt going forward, I think probably need to take it back. As we know, last season left some farmers with short forage supplies. So Peter, do you have any advice on how farmers might make their current stocks go further, or is it a little too late?
I think, at the moment, it's probably too late. You've got what you've got in the clamp. You can buy more dry feed in or whatever to try eking out silages. I mean, obviously you can do a bit of a forage budget to make sure you're only going back so at a certain speed, so you've got enough silage to get to the end. But I think where people have made very good quality silage, and I come back to this all the time, where people have made good quality silage, there is an option to maybe damping that down a little bit with some hay or some straw, or to add some other forage that might not be quite such good quality. If you're starting from a high point, if you've made pretty average sort of type silages, it's very difficult to bulk that out. It's already a bit bulky and stemmy. So I think the only thing we can do is try and make a better silage next year. And if we do make better silages, cutting more regularly, we will grow more bulk as well. So it's not just a matter of, we saw in the multi-cut trials that we did, we grew more bulk at a higher quality on a 6-cut system against a 3-cut system.
And moving on now to silage making itself, again, an early first cut is widely accepted as key to making high quality silage. But what should farmers be looking at when deciding when to take the first cut? And I'll start with John, and then if Peter wants to add as well.
Very often people get sort of into a little bit of a tunnel that diesel's expensive, contractor's expensive, and we've got to try and cut back on costs. ultimately what we need to be doing is making the nicest silage we can. Over the last number of years, grass now grows 12 months of the year, virtually, in most parts of the UK. If we're not taking silage off early, what we find is quite often somebody will take a cut in the middle of May, and it's not as good as they'd expected it or whatever, because quite often there's a bit of old dead stuff in there that's been there all winter. So I think, you know, what we need to be doing, as soon as there's a reasonable cut there in the spring and the weather's with us, you know, I think when you want to cut early, for me, you take silage off as early as you can, but it's when the weather's there. So you're making a nice silage early on. It might not be the best silage that you make on the farm that year. Maybe the second cut can sometimes be better, because some of the very early first cuts can be grass that's been there all year. But you take that grass off, start afresh, and what you find from that generally, people who take an early cut off, they're taking a second cut off, probably by the end of May, they'll have more of a higher quality silage in the bank. And then if it does go wet or dry or whatever, we've already got that grass. You know, the bulk, a large proportion of what we're going to make for the season, and the best quality is already in the clamp. And I think as well, where people are taking a cut too late, very often in May, it's white in the bottom. That's a peak growing season, middle of May, end of May. You know, the grass is going to grow at its fastest rate there, and we've cut a heavy cut of grass off. It's dead in the bottom. We've cut it too low, and it'll take a fortnight maybe before it starts greening up. So we lose all that growing, that growing time. So, you know, taking it early to clean the silage off and get the quality in the bulk. Quality doesn't mean less bulk.
I suppose the counter to that is that the weather, you know, last year we experienced such kind of extremes of weather, didn't we? And it's quite hard sometimes to take that early cut because you might think you've got a weather window coming up. So any advice to encourage?
I think we normally get a weather window somewhere in April, very early May, depending on the part of country, but sort of, you know, I'm based sort of West Wales, and it's, you know, we're fairly early. And we will get a weather window between the middle of April and the first week in May. And so I think we take silage off as early as we can. I'm not saying it has to be in the first or second week in April, but as soon as if you're going to take an early cut, you're not going to take that early cut until the weather's there. So when the weather's there, and we've got the opportunity to make some nice silage, cut it, take it, put it in the bank, get your slurry and your fertiliser back out, and get the fresh growth coming back. Because if we're cutting silage and it's still green in the bottom, that stuff, you'll see it growing back within a couple of days. You take a heavy cut off, it's going to be a couple of weeks.
I think we've got a question back there.
Hi, we've gone for the multi-cut system, but silage slippage under 35 dry matter, I don't know what to do about that. Any ideas?
How?
Yeah.
What?
I think when we're doing a multi-cut, we've got the reason you're doing multi-cut is to get a much more powerful silage. So the whole structure of that leaf is far more tender. And over-rolling that or clamping it too high, because you imagine, you know, you've got all this weight coming down, so we either roll it very hard, or if we're going up 3-4 meters or whatever of silage, the weight coming down on that does tend to have the effect of bursting the cells. Yeah, and then once we burst the cells in that plant, that liquid can't go sideways, it can't go backwards, it can only go forwards. And the analogy I would use on farm, if you think of a bucket of grapes or something, if you put your hand in a bucket of grapes, it's nice and dry. If you put your foot in there and squash it, so you overroll it or too much weight, it'll be liquid. So it'll be very wet and it'll pour away. So where we do multi-cut, I think, you know, heading towards 35% is probably a must stop, especially if you're going high. But possibly, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but maybe with a multi-cut, do we not over-roll it too much in the bottom? Because it's going to be compressed very well anyway. Maybe other people might disagree with that, but I think to sort of overcome it, get it up to 35% dry matter, avoid going too high. Yeah, it's all this hydraulic pressure coming down, and silage pits that are too wide tend to have there's a bit of friction on the walls. So if we can narrow the face, that will help slippage as well. And there is some evidence to show we shouldn't be filling that pit at more than 20 degrees angle. It should be a shallow fill. And I think, yeah, that's probably about as much as, we can say.
Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, we use a forage wagon, and I think when you do multi-cut system, that's the tool for the job, not precision chop machine.
Yeah, I think chop length, traditionally we try and chop the grass short to get it to compact. When we're doing multi-cut, chop length doesn't matter to the cow. The longer the chop, the better, and whether it's a wagon or something. But ultimately, it is a tender thing, and I think the angle of fill on the clamp is quite critical to it as well, because we can have longer chop lengths, but if you've got quite a steep ramp you're trying to go up with a loading shovel, the tearing of that can put cracks into that silage. Then as we're filling up with more silage, there's cracks formed in there, ready to cause problems in the winter. So, but in a way, the longer the better for multi-cut.
Definitely, yeah. So, on over there.
Great. Molly?
Obviously, still speaking on clamp slippage, will that sort of lend itself to sort of European style clamps where they sort of fill them over the top from end to end, and instead of sort of stacking it front to back as you come back, would that help?
I think
layer the silage more and prevent it from sort of first cut being there, second cut, then slipping away from that again. Would that be something that would help?
Definitely. When I was a lad, we used to make silage with a buck rake. Okay, little buck rake behind a tractor, and the only way you could fill a clamp is what they call the Dorset wedge. You build it forward. Yeah. The size and the power of the kit we've got today, that is irrelevant. So, if we can, at maximum of 20 degrees angle, fill a clamp, it gives us a lot of other benefits. We're not tearing that clamp as we're going up with it on the loading shovel. Because the loading shovel is travelling across it fairly flat, it's rolling it much more evenly. Yeah, it's not doing this tearing. And a big benefit to it is where you have a shallow fill, if you've got a new lay, and then you've got some standing crop you bought, so there's not quite such good quality or whatever, you've got the silage that you're going to feed through the winter doesn't change that often. It's a gradual change as you're going back, as the layers change slowly. Whereas when you're doing it, filling it in a Dorset wedge type, you've got your good stuff, then your not so good stuff, and so the diet changes to the cow quite a lot. So definitely filling it long, shallow angles will help this tearing it. It'll help bind it. It'll roll it better, and it'll feed the cow better through the winter.
Well, we're nearly at the end of the session now. I'm sure the speakers will be here afterwards if anyone's got any more questions they'd like to ask. But just to wrap up, could I ask each of you just to kind of give your one take-home top tip message from today's discussion? And I'll start with you, Peter.
I think there's sort of what we've got to aim for is high-quality silage, and the various speakers have sort of spoken about the lays and the feeding the crop and all the rest of it. But ultimately, we're going to make this nice quality silage with new lays and whatever but we have to preserve it in the best way. And a silage additive, I say silage additive, a proven silage additive, lots of things on the market. If we use a good quality silage additive proven to do the job, will preserve more of the sugars. And a very good silage maker, not treating, will lose about 10% of the dry matter in a fermentation. That 10% isn't the average silage, that is pretty much all sugars. By treating, the data we have from Ecosile, we halve that. So we're halving the losses. So we're saving an awful lot more sugar. So we're keeping the crop closer to what was grown in the field, rather than allowing nature to sort of take away from it. So using an additive definitely retains your